Hello, my name is Gilad. I'm a product manager in Elasticsearch, and presenting with me today is Jason Burns, who's a product manager in Kibana. I'll start with a brief overview of how runtime fields are structured in Elasticsearch, and Jason will follow and explain how analysts can create and use runtime fields in Kibana. But first, we'll be talking about a few roadmap items, so I have to show these slides because we have lawyers too. With that out of the way, Elasticsearch traditionally relied on schema on write. That means when you get a document, you parse it, analyze it, and generate the fields those sophisticated structures like the index that allow you to provide excellent relevance ranking at great speed at very large scales. For most use cases, that's the way to go. If you know what you want to do with your data when you get it, that's probably your way forward because of all those advantages, speed, scale, relevance. However, in certain situations, you require more flexibility. And for this, we have introduced runtime fields, which is the name we gave our implementation of schema on read. With runtime fields, when you define a field, you just define how to calculate its value. But the value of the field is evaluated at the time a query requires it, only when a query requires it. Have a look on the right at how a runtime field definition looks. It has a normal data type, but it also contains a script in this case, a short painless script, that defines how to calculate the value of the field per every document. Because the definition of the field does not include the calculation of the value per document, just the script, the field can be added at any point in time, even after the documents were ingested into Elasticsearch. And in fact, you can even add the runtime field with a query. So it's completely ephemeral. It exists just when the query runs, and you wouldn't see it in the schema. Just the person running the query would have the definition of the field and then the field available for use. Runtime fields are consumed like any other field. In fact, you can run a query against several indices and have the field in some of them as runtime field and in others as index field. So those that have evaluated the value of the field at the time of the ingest will provide better performance, but other than that, there's no change. So you need not change your queries or visualizations if some of the indices have the field as runtime field, or in other cases they have it in other indices have the field as an index field. That's very important because a lot of the use cases, and I'll talk about this in a second, rely on having this field move from being a runtime field to being an index field in different phases of the data stream, or the other way around, overriding, shadowing an index field with new definitions that you introduce as runtime fields. So let's have a look at a few groups of use cases for which runtime field is efficient. The first is the simplest. You may have indexed the documents and just in retrospect remember that you want this additional field. Well, runtime field just allows you to add those fields, whereas with normal schema on write fields, the document pretty much lives with the fields that were defined for it at the time the data was ingested. Then there's the ephemeral field. You may need the field just for a particular visualization. Maybe there's just one analyst that wants this field for a particular task, and runtime fields are great for that because this analyst will not pollute everyone's schema with the additional field. There's no need for additional computing resources because you don't save this information for each and every document. So the decision to add a field becomes a much smaller decision. Even if you add a runtime field to the schema, you can still delete it later. Making this a smaller decision means other people can have the right to create fields. Analysts, for example, can create fields as part of their work. It gives them the power to control the set of fields they have at their disposal without impacting the computing resources and with the cost that's derived from that. Then there's the move to the other side. You might have indexed documents and made a mistake in the way you parsed a particular field. Now, that might be a data stream. You have the mistake in a few indices. The rest of the indices, after you realize the mistake, you'll fix it in the ingest processing and you'll get the right documents, the field index correctly. But you'll still have a few indices with a mistake. And when you query the whole data stream, you'll still have this problem. So with runtime fields, you can just shadow an existing index field with runtime fields with different parsing definitions, and those indices will respond a bit more slowly, but the users will see the results of the runtime field and they can query the data stream and get the correct results, and that allows you as an administrator, as an analyst, to immediately fix a mistake in the indexing without needing to re-index. And then all of this simplicity opens the door for a completely different workflow when ingesting new data. You can simply start by relying on the fields that existed in the source without defining any kind of scripts or anything like that. Start working with that, slowly generate the runtime fields that you require for your work, and then see which of those fields are parsed correctly and are really useful, and you want to transform them into index fields when you create the new indices. And that's very simple. You simply, in the template of the data stream uses, you simply take this section with a field and move it from the runtime field section of the template to the properties section. And that's it. You don't need to define processor or anything like that. The script, the same script that you defined, will be evaluated at the time of the ingest. Before I hand it over to Jason, I just want to mention one new addition that we are currently introducing, and that's the composite runtime fields. It's very efficient to use runtime fields with a pattern to parse a field into multiple fields. That can be dissect, where you define separators, or a grok pattern. A grok pattern is comprised of other grok patterns or of regex, and then recursively until it all ends up being regex. But it provides you the power of regex without all the cost of maintaining complex regex, because for many systems you simply have a ready-made grok pattern that will parse the normal log messages. And if you have a special case, you can still use the building blocks that we have already created for parsing the trivial things like IP address. So the cost of maintaining the grok pattern is simpler, and you've got grok patterns that parse messages to tens of fields. Well, now with the introduction of composite runtime fields, you don't need to generate tens of runtime fields. You create one runtime field, define that it uses this grok pattern, and then it will generate those tens of fields as runtime fields from one definition. That just makes the whole administration and the creation of this structure that much simpler. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jason.
Thanks, Gilad. I really appreciate Gilad setting the broader context before I get started today. It's an important part of the runtime field story, that is the end-to-end story. Unlike scripted fields, runtime fields are a part of the stack. They're not just tucked away inside Kibana. Everything that I show you today is going to be focused on Kibana, but I want to get to a little bit of our vision for runtime fields as well. I think you'll see the runtime fields are going to be a big part of our stack in Elasticsearch and Kibana, and dynamically in the queries that pass between them. 7.15 brings a few significant changes to the Kibana runtime field editing experience. Runtime fields have only been around for a few releases, and we're continuing to refine this experience, but this update is about making it easier to create them. Before I get into what's new, let's take a quick tour of our quick refresher for runtime fields for anyone that's new to the concept. So the Kibana runtime fields editor was released in 7.13. We released a Discover and Lend support shortly after that. This release was improved. This release adds improved error handling and the ability to preview your scripts as you create it. As Gilad mentioned, compound fields are coming up pretty soon. So as I said, each release just is going to continue to bring improvements, and we'll continue to double down on runtime fields in the 8x series. I want to mention Kibana runtime fields are part of an index pattern. We are aware that sometimes permission issues can keep users from being able to modify index patterns. So we're working on a solution that gives those users the ability to create a runtime field using data from an index pattern they may not have the rights to modify. Another concept that we want to mention is the idea of gracefully fail. If anyone can create a runtime field, a poorly written script or a poorly performing script can cause a lot of problems. So we want to add enough isolation to make sure that discovery users and dashboard users are able to use as much of the content that can still work. So we fail locally instead of globally. The last thing I want to mention before I show you around is that the features that Gilad described and what I'm about to show you are only going to continue to be more integrated over time. I know that there are admins out there furrowing their brows about the idea of the dynamic compute resources from runtime fields, but we want that to come full circle as well. So a runtime field that's defined in Kibana today can be promoted to an index mapping tomorrow. Maybe not exactly tomorrow, but you get what I mean. So let's go on to the demo. It's probably exciting to open lens and create a runtime field and create a chart and just kind of go to town, but I think it will make a lot more sense if we build to that. So let's start in index pattern management today. And I'm in actually Discover, but there's a quick way to get to index pattern management by clicking Manage Index Pattern Fields. And if you look, these are just the same fields that you're always used to seeing. I will mention that scripted fields is still here. If you have the need to use one or want to migrate one, they're still available. But for both the performance and the cross compatibility, I think that runtime fields make a lot more sense for most use cases. So let's create our first runtime field. If I click Add Field, that's what opens the runtime field editor experience. And I can show you around. We need a name for our field. We need a type for our field. We can set a custom label if we would like a really detailed name, but we want a pretty name for our charts. We can use set value. I'll show you that more in a minute to set our actual script. Set format is how you would go to change the string formatting or URL formatting or number formatting or any of that. And we still have popularity, but we've tucked it under advanced settings here just to make things a little more readable. So let's make a runtime field. I want to call this greeting. And mention really quick on the type. Keyword is the correct type for this, obviously, because we're outputting a string. But the type that you select will definitely have an impact on the script that you write. We're working on ways to make this simpler. We want to make type conversion simpler. But for now, remember that if you're going to output a keyword, you need a string. If you're going to output a decimal, you need a double, so on. So let's go to set value again and open this guy up. And talk about the experience in general. So this is the new preview panel that we've added in 7.15. And what this does is gives you a much more proactive or interactive way to create a runtime field. This is where the magic happens, so to speak. But we definitely understand it's not entirely magical for less experienced painless scripters. So I want to talk about painless just for a moment. Painless is evolving along with the Kibana runtime field experience. We're working on ways, like I said, to make the syntax simpler. Some of our priorities are taking the complexity out of changing data types when you need to cast something. We want to make sure that it's simple to work with dates, whether you're just trying to convert from the type of date from your document to something that you need in the script, or you just want to do simple date math. We want to make that easy, as well as we know it's a hassle to deal with, if statements to test if a field's there, that's a value. So we want to make that easier as well. So consider what I'm going to show you here to be the groundwork for both the painless experience, language experience, and the runtime field experience in Kibana. So let's get back to this blank box. We want to give you more help. Right now, it's a little intimidating. I'm going to go on a limb and say there's probably a few of you that aren't sure what we should type here. Providing examples, having quick script starting points for common cases, type-specific examples for the helper text, just a few things that we're talking about to make this more approachable. So this is a good time for this runtime field to say hello. Again, we're already at the right type. We just need a script. So I don't want to leave anyone hanging. Start with an emit. Always start with an emit. If you've used a scripted field before, this is really the big change in your scripts. Converting a script might be a little tricky if you have really complex logic. But the main thing to remember is that if you are returning a value, instead of return, you need to use emit. All paths need to lead to an emit. So let's type emit hello world. I can type it, put an exclamation because I am happy to be here. And if I take a look at this preview panel, you can see the document idea that we're currently parsing. You can see the fields in the document as well as the output of our script. If you noticed as I was typing, you get active auto completion, dynamic error handling, and most importantly, you see the output of your script here. You don't have to go to Discover just to see if it works. Just quickly show more expands. You can see all the fields there. I can pin them. I'll get to a little more about how that's useful later, but let's save this for now. And before we pop over to Discover and see this field kind of in action, so to speak, I just want to show you a few things. So let me filter here and see I've got my field already. It's showing up in the list of every other field. I do have this little icon I mentioned that tells me that this is a runtime field and it only exists in this index pattern. And I have my edit button, which would, for any other field, would just take you to edit the formats and things like that, but it takes you to the runtime field editor since this is a runtime field. And unlike other fields that you can't remove, this one you can delete. I'm not going to do it, but if I were to type remove, I can remove it here. So let's unfilter this out here and let's go back to Discover. So if I go to Discover, I'm in the same index pattern, you notice 2022 vehicles. And if I were to filter here, I can see my greeting field and I can add it to my table just like any other field. It's not very useful as a field, so maybe we can come up with a better example, but it's definitely there. So let's do something that is more useful. I'm going to remove this from here because we don't need to see it. Let's kind of filter this out. I could go back to index pattern management like I did before, but as I said, everywhere that you're using interacting with runtime fields, whether it's Lens or Discover, you have this handy menu. So if I just go add a field from here, I don't actually need to go back to index pattern management. I can just do it right on top of Discover. So the data set that we're using has a field for the city mileage and has a field for the highway mileage. But we're going to build a very simple visualization. I think I would rather just have a simple average of the two. It's a great use case for a runtime field. It's a simple thing to do. So let's do that. Let's call this field mileage average. Keyword's not going to work in this case. Since we're doing division, it's going to output a decimal. So we're going to make that double. And let's go into set value here. So maybe I don't exactly remember what the name of the field that I want to use is. And I can't see it right here, obviously. Let's revisit that pinning feature that I talked about. So let's filter just so we don't have to scroll forever. And I can see fuel underscore economy underscore city and fuel underscore economy underscore highway right here. And those are the fields I want to use. I can pin those, and that way, if I'm looking at tons of fields, they always stay there at the top. I don't have to worry about trying to find them again later. But that's not really what we're after here. Let's show the actual writing of the script, and you can kind of see where this comes into play. So again, ABE, always be emitting. We need to get these values in our script. Today we're using doc syntax, but this is something we're definitely going to make simpler soon. Doc syntax is as follows: doc brackets dot value. And then you need the name of your field in single quotes between. And I'll use the auto completion here to get city. And then let's add it to doc value. And when I open this one, we'll call that highway. I can just see the H there. Right now, we're just adding them. So let's put some parentheses and divide by 2. And boom, we have our working script. Mileage average, you can see it's 33 for this particular document. I could scroll around and see more values to make sure that it's valuing correctly against all the documents that I have. The next thing I want to show you here is that, or at least, speak to, is more experienced scripters are probably wondering what happens when your field is missing a value or doesn't exist in the document at all. I just want to reiterate that's something that is right now you test as an if statement in your script, but we want to make that easier. So it's something that the new doc syntax will handle as a way to say, hey, if there's no value, use this default value instead, for example. Let me save my field since it's working. And now that we're back in Discover, we should be able to do the same thing, filter mileage and add it and see, yep, it's working there, evaluating against all the documents like we expected. I do want to show the kind of connected nature here, and just that you can use these right away. There's nothing special here going on that you need to prepare. So instead of doing something more in Discover, I can just click visualize and pop right over to Lens, and my field is maybe not the most useful visualization. Looking at the average mileage broken down by timestamp is not super useful. So what else could we use that's more useful? I know that this data set has a make field, or sorry, a manufacturer field and the division field. The manufacturer field is the parent companies. Let's take a look at that just real quick, and you can see what I mean. If I were to use this in my visualization, everything looks nice, but I would get General Motors. I wouldn't get Chevrolet or GMC, for example. What I really want to do is use this division field that exists. And when I look at this field, it has the brands the way that I want them in there. But if you notice, there's a little bit of all caps going on, and it just doesn't look very nice. So we're going to do a little string manipulation just to try and make this look a little prettier. Let's go in to our runtime field editor. We're going to add a field to this index pattern. And what we want to do is a little bit of regex. And I got this script on a text editor here because I don't want to trip up through it and typing it out through the demo. And it's a little more complex. Keyword is correct because we still want to output a string. And in set value, I'm going to type in this. And you can see I'm basically creating an array of the words split from the input string, splitting on the space. I'm creating an empty string, and then just one by one, I'm iterating through each word, and I'm capitalizing the first letter of it. So this is a quick and dirty approach. Obviously, it's not going to work great for BMW, but it works well for Mini and some of the other ones. Again, I can browse the documents, but I'm pretty sure we're going to just keep seeing Mini for a while because of the way the data is set up. So let's save it. If I look, my chart is obviously still the same because we need to use this field. So let's grab our make field and let's drag it on top of timestamp. And you can see, hey, I've got Honda. Chevrolet is now there. If I were to increase the number of items you can see on this list, you'll see Kia Motor Corporation is now actually in proper case instead of all caps. And that's really what we were going for. We want a quick and dirty way to manipulate strings right here without having to go and re-index our data and deal with all that kind of headache. So that is a whirlwind, but hopefully very informative tour of runtime fields in Kibana. But I promised a few details about where we're going next. So let me go and kind of bump my slides forward. We just did these two. And let's talk about what's next. So if you recall Gilad's last slide, we're actively working on bringing composite runtime fields to Kibana. That will be a step towards another goal, which is we want to make it easy to parse previously ingested data. We want to be able to create one painless script that can take advantage of Grok and Dissect to output multiple fields from a single script. Supporting Grok and Dissect aren't the end of the road, however. Expanding the use of runtime fields right into solutions is the next step of this journey. The real goal is to allow users to parse logs into multiple fields without writing a script at all. So, baby steps, of course. As they say, the first step is a doozy. We do think this compound field capability that we're adding soon will open up a lot of new possibilities in the meantime. But keep your eye out for where we're going with this long term. I think it's going to be pretty exciting. I mentioned this also briefly in the beginning, but it's worth mentioning again. We know not all users can visualize, not all users who need to visualize data have permissions to modify the index patterns that they use. We want to make it possible for runtime fields to be used in more ad hoc scenarios, as well as one-off runtime fields right in a visualization, for example. This capability really leans into that idea that users need the independence to to explore their data and make the decisions to transform data as they go, instead of requesting an administrator with higher permissions to help them when they get stuck. And finally, it's obvious that runtime fields could impact the performance of your cluster. If let run amok, it could definitely be an issue. So we're investing in management performance monitoring tools to see the impact of runtime fields in real time. Imagine a global admin cockpit where you can proactively migrate a dynamic calculation to an ingest time calculation when it makes sense. In the future, we imagine that this goes a step further. You won't only be able to promote a runtime field, but admins will have active insights that suggest when it makes more field for a sense to take compute resources than disk space and vice versa. So that's all I have for today. I really want to say thank you to Gilad and say thank you for your attention as well. We're anxious for feedback on how and why you use runtime fields and what your experience is like. Please share those to me, good and bad. We definitely want to continue to iterate and make this better. If you're interested in getting an early peek at some of the things that we're working on, feel free to reach out to me directly. We're always looking for usability study participants to continue to improve. You can reach out to me at jason.burns@elastic.co for more information. And that's it. There's a few links here if you have access to the slide deck that might be useful to get more information on both what Gilad and I mentioned. But that's it. That's Runtime Fields so far. We're really excited about it, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.